There was a time when someone walked through your neighborhood every evening at dusk. You heard them before you saw them, a slow rhythm, metal against pavement, always the same route, always the same hour. They carried a long pole and moved from one point to the next with practiced efficiency. You didn't watch them work. You simply expected the result. By the time you looked out your window after dinner, the work was already done. The streets glowed softly. The night felt safer. And the person who made that happen had already moved on to the next block. Then one season they stopped coming. For most of the 19th century and well into the 20th, cities operated under a simple problem: darkness. Streets had no ambient light. Homes used candles or oil lamps, but these did little for the public space outside. Commerce slowed after sundown. Crime increased. Navigation became difficult. The solution was not electric, it was human. The lamplighter was hired to light gas lamps each evening and extinguish them each morning. The job existed because infrastructure required it. Gas lamps could not ignite themselves. Someone had to walk the route, adjust the flow, strike the flame, and ensure the system functioned. This was not ceremonial. It was operational. Cities installed gas lighting systems throughout the 1800s. London, Paris, New York, Boston, Philadelphia. The lamps were mounted on posts at regular intervals. Each lamp connected to an underground gas line. The flame burned steadily once lit, but it required manual activation. The lamplighter made this happen. The work was taken for granted in the way that functional infrastructure always is. People noticed when lamps failed to light. They did not notice when the job was done correctly. The lamplighter became part of the architecture of evening life, predictable and unremarkable. The lamplighter carried a long pole, usually between 8 and 12 feet. At the top was a wick or taper that could be lit, and then used to ignite the gas jet inside each lamp. Some poles included a hook for opening and closing the lamp's glass casing. Others had a small lever mechanism to turn the gas valve. The tool was simple, durable, and designed for repetition. The route was fixed. A lamplighter might be responsible for several dozen lamps spread across a few city blocks. The work began at dusk, before full darkness set in, and followed the same sequence every night. Timing mattered. Light the lamps too early and gas was wasted. Too late and complaints followed. In the morning, the process reversed. The lamplighter returned to extinguish each flame, conserving gas until the next evening. This required walking the route twice daily in all weather without deviation. Rain, snow, wind. The lamps were lit and extinguished regardless. The skill required was minimal but not negligible. The lamplighter had to know the route, recognize when a lamp malfunctioned, and maintain a steady pace. There was no supervision. The work was solitary. Success meant invisibility. The job paid poorly. Lamplighters were often older men, immigrants, or individuals with limited employment options. It was steady work but not respected work. There was no career ladder, no advancement. You lit lamps until you couldn't, and then someone else did. The community depended on the lamplighter but did not engage with him. He was part of the evening routine, like the milk delivery or the street sweeper. His presence was assumed. His absence was noticed only when the lamps stayed dark. Socially, the lamplighter occupied a position of functional necessity without status. He was employed by the city or a private gas company, but he held no authority. He did not enforce laws. He did not interact with the public except in passing. His work was solitary and repetitive. Pay varied by city and decade, but it remained low throughout the profession's existence. In the mid-1800s, a lamplighter in an American city might earn between 50 cents and $1 per day. This was enough to survive, but not much more. The work was not seasonal, which provided stability, but it also offered no opportunity for increased income. Hours were determined by daylight. In summer, the lamplighter worked later in the evening and earlier in the morning. In winter, the shifts lengthened. There were no days off. Lamps required lighting every single night. If a lamplighter was ill or absent, a replacement had to be found immediately, or the route went dark. Despite this dependence, the role carried no prestige. Lamplighters were not mentioned in civic records with any regularity. They did not appear in city directories with the same prominence as clerks or tradesmen. When newspapers mentioned them, it was usually in the context of a failure, a dark street, a complaint, an accident. The job was invisible by design. The system worked best when no one thought about it. The lamplighter ensured that evening life could continue without interruption, but this contribution was not celebrated. It was expected. The first sign of change came not with the lamplighter's work, but with the lamps themselves. In the 1880s and 1890s, cities began experimenting with electric arc lights. These were brighter than gas lamps and required no manual ignition. They were installed in commercial districts first, where visibility and safety were prioritized. Gas lamps remained in residential neighborhoods, side streets, and less affluent areas. The infrastructure was already in place. Replacing it required significant investment. So for a time, both systems coexisted. Lamplighters continued their routes, but the routes grew shorter. Municipal budgets began to shift. Electric lighting, once experimental, became standard in new construction. Gas companies lobbied to maintain their contracts, but the economic argument weakened. Electric lamps were more reliable, brighter, and eventually cheaper to operate. They did not require daily human labor. Lamplighters noticed the changes gradually. A section of their route would be removed. A lamp would be replaced with an electric fixture. The work continued, but the scale diminished. Some lamplighters were reassigned to maintain gas lines or inspect equipment. Others were let go quietly, with no fanfare and no replacement. The profession did not collapse. It eroded. Each year, fewer lamps required lighting. Each year, fewer workers were needed. The job still functioned, but it was becoming unnecessary. The decisive shift occurred in the early 20th century, though the exact moment varied by city. Electric streetlights became the municipal standard. Gas infrastructure was phased out, not through sweeping policy changes, but through routine infrastructure upgrades. When a gas line needed repair, it was often replaced with electric wiring instead. This transition required no public debate. It was treated as a technical improvement, not a labor issue. City councils approved budgets for electrification without discussing the workers who would be displaced. Gas companies quietly reduced their workforce. Lamplighters were not fired en masse. Their contracts simply ended. Routes were discontinued. The work stopped. There was no announcement. No newspaper editorial mourning the loss of the lamplighter. The profession faded because it was no longer needed, and because the infrastructure that sustained it was being dismantled piece by piece. By the 1920s, most American cities had completed the transition to electric streetlights. Gas lamps remained in a few places: parks, historical districts, wealthy neighborhoods that valued the aesthetic. But these were maintained by utility workers, not dedicated lamplighters. The job title disappeared from employment records. The replacement required no protest because it was not perceived as controversial. Electric lights were better. They worked automatically. They required less maintenance. The logic was straightforward. The lamplighter's role had been necessary under one system and became unnecessary under another. This was understood as progress. The last lamplighters did not leave dramatic accounts of their work. Most moved into other forms of manual labor. Some found work with utility companies, maintaining electric lines or inspecting infrastructure. Others left urban employment entirely, returning to rural areas or shifting into unrelated trades. There were no retirement ceremonies, no public recognition of service. When a lamplighter's route was discontinued, he was simply told the work had ended. If he was fortunate, he received a small severance. If not, he found new employment on his own. A few cities kept lamplighters on for symbolic purposes. In London, a small number of gas lamps were preserved in certain districts, and workers were hired to maintain them as a historical gesture. But this was decoration, not infrastructure. The profession had ended in function, even if it lingered in form. The tools remained for a time. Long poles were stored in utility sheds, eventually discarded or sold as scrap. Gas lamps were removed from streets and either destroyed or repurposed. A few ended up in museums, labeled as artifacts of an earlier era. Most were simply forgotten. The transition happened quietly because it was seamless. Electric lights turned on automatically. No one needed to walk the streets at dusk. The routine that had structured evening life for decades simply stopped, and daily life continued without interruption. Traces of the profession lingered in language and infrastructure. The term lamplighter appeared in older city records, union documents, and employment archives. But within a generation, it became unfamiliar. People knew what a streetlight was, but not who had once lit it. Old gas lamp posts remained on some streets, converted to electric fixtures. Their design, ornate iron, curved necks, glass casings, hinted at an earlier system, but few people recognized the connection. The posts became decorative, valued for their appearance rather than their original function. In literature and illustration, the lamplighter occasionally appeared as a nostalgic figure. Children's books depicted him as a kindly old man lighting lamps at twilight, a symbol of simpler times. This image bore little resemblance to the actual work, which had been monotonous, poorly paid, and unremarkable. Historians documented the profession in passing, usually as a footnote in broader discussions of urban infrastructure. The job was mentioned briefly, then moved past. There was little to say. It had existed. It had ended. The reasons were clear. The lamplighter disappeared because the system that required him disappeared. There was no conflict, no resistance, no public mourning. The job ended the way most jobs end when they become unnecessary, quietly, without ceremony, absorbed into the ordinary process of change. People adjusted. Streets remained lit. Commerce continued. Safety improved, if anything. The absence of the lamplighter did not create a void. It simply meant that one task no longer required human labor. The profession left no monuments. No plaques marked the routes once walked. No museums dedicated themselves to preserving the tools or documenting the workers. The job was remembered, if at all, as a minor detail in the history of urban development. And that was appropriate. The lamplighter had never sought recognition. He had done his work, collected his pay, and moved on. When the work ended, he did the same. The world adjusted because it always does. The job disappeared without protest because nothing required it to remain. The streets still glowed at dusk. Someone just stopped lighting them by hand.